Hey, this is Peter from the Ultimate WordPress Guide. Thanks for joining me on another exciting tutorial where you'll learn how to use WordPress and Elementor to create breathtaking websites. In this video, we'll talk about Happy Addons for Elementor, and I'll take you through a full feature tour of everything that this add-on has to offer. Happy Addons for Elementor has over 80 widgets, 35 feature-rich free, and 40 plus elegant premium widgets. It sports 21 exclusive and unique features, which includes things like section nesting, live copy, motion effects, and much more. It has an extensive library of over 400 design templates that you can easily include into your design, all of which we'll cover in this two-part series. Happy Addons for Elementor features 6 unique pricing options, 3 annual and 3 lifetime, starting from as low as $31 for a starter package, which is one site for 1 year, which includes all of the widgets, unlimited nesting, presets, over 400 of them, on-demand asset loading, specific Happy Addons, line icons, live copy, image masking, so much more, and updates for 1 year. The professional plan is $67, you get 5 sites. The business plan is only $132 for 1,000 sites. Over to the lifetime plan, you can see the same one site lifetime license for just under $100, just over $200 for the professional license, and a little over $300 for 1,000 sites for a lifetime license. So without further ado, let's dive right in. First, we'll look at the card widget. I already have a few card widgets dragged out onto the canvas, but let's take a look at all the available settings and styling options that we have available for this particular widget. So over to the content tab, you can already see, I've referred to them earlier, there are a couple of presets that are available on this particular item. So we'll go through just a couple of them just to give you an idea of all the styling changes that have applied. And these are available out of the box with a Happy Addons for Elementor Pro license. So you'll see that there's quite a couple, which changes the overall look and feel of these widgets. And you can set this up and style them appropriately as you wish afterwards. These are just a few starter templates to really get you going with some basic styling. Okay, but let's take one of the ones that have already been set up and we'll go through the content settings. So first off, we have the icon or the image and the badge section. This is where you'll upload an image that'll be featured in this area. I can set up image masking if I wish. There are a couple of different preset options available. I can position the image, I can size it appropriately, and I can set it to repeat or not repeat. In this instance, I'll leave that as is. The next item down is where I set the image size, and I can set the image size on the card widget as well. But in this instance, I want to keep it at the top. The badge text, that's this little area right here, so I can change the content of that badge text. Next, over to the description area, this is where I specify the title and the description just above the button. And lastly, we go to the button itself, where I can change the text. I can link it dynamically to a dynamic tag or something that's already stored in my dynamic library. I can link this to a URL either within the website or externally. I can set it up to open in a new window or add a no-follow tag to it. I can also specify whether the button needs to be full width in this instance. Then I can align it either to the left, I can justify it, but I'll just keep this as a center aligned, and I'll keep the button in the left hand corner. I can specify a specific icon that I want to choose alongside the text on the button, specify whether the icon needs to be before or after the text, and obviously also just adjust the icon spacing between the text and the icon. If I head over to the Style tab, this is where I can really go and style the content of this. I can set up the image width, I can set the image height, I can set up specific offsets related to the image themselves. So I can offset the image off the card either horizontally or vertically. I'm not going to do that, so I'll just click there to reset it back into position. I can set up the padding around the image on the card widget. I can set up a border for the image, none is specified now, and as you can see, there is a 25 pixel border radius applied to each one of the corners. If I wish, I can also add a box shadow, so I'll just put that up to show you what that looks like. But as you can see, with a padding applied, it does the box shadow around the entire container for the image. Not really what I want to do there, so I'll just go ahead and reset that. In terms of the image, again, I can set up opacity on the normal and the hover states. So on the hover state, you can see if I hover over the image, nothing happens. But if I change that opacity and I hover over the image, you'll see that it applies that translucency factor. So we'll just keep that as is. Furthermore, also I can add CSS filters like a blur. I can set the brightness, contrast, saturation, and hue on the image itself. Or I can set up a hover animation. Yeah, so let's put a grow animation, so I can see if I click on that, it changes. Let's change it to a pulse and so on. But I'm not going to set a animation in this instance. Next, over to the badge, which is this little guy over here. On the badge, I can set various positioning on the card, and I can specify an offset both horizontally and vertically. So you'll see there, if I move that around, it moves the badge along. I can specify the padding on the top, bottom, left, and right of the inner part of the content of this badge. I can set up the text color, badge color. In this instance, I can set up a border, which is solid, a border width. So at this point, you can see that there is a border applied, but because this is from a preset, this is already default. So if I go and change that to a different border size, you'll see that that takes effect. So that looks like about the border size that was applied on the preset. Obviously, the border color, I can choose from either the global colors that I have set up for the website, or I can go into the color picker and specify the color that I want. I can apply a border radius, and again here you won't see any border radius applied, but because it has been set up on the preset itself, if I go and change that to a different border, you'll see that changes. So that just tells me, looking at this, that the border radius on the preset is set to 15. Again, here I can set up a box shadow. As you can see, it just lifts that badge up. I'm not going to do that, so I'll just reset. I can set up the typography, specify the family, text size, weight, transformation, style, decoration, letter spacing, and so on. Next, over to the title and the description. So here again, very simple, very basic Elementor stuff, where I can set the content padding around the content area. On the title section, I can specify the amount of spacing that I want between the title and the description. I can specify the text color and typography, and on the description itself, same thing. The spacing that I can apply between the description and the button. So let me just perhaps change that to a value that you can see. Okay, so we'll set that to, let's say, 30 pixels. That's fine. And same thing here, I can set the text color and the typography. And here you can see there's a slight opacity factor or translucency factor applied to this text. So if I just drag that all the way up, you'll see that the text becomes completely white. Okay, typography, again, same thing. And lastly, on the button, so I've got a button down here that changes color on hover state. So I can see that there's padding applied to the inside of the button, left and right 20 pixels, top and bottom 12 pixels. I can set the typography. I can see that it has a border, a solid border applied in normal state, which is about 2 pixels wide. The border color is white, no border radius applied, no box shadow applied. So again, here on the normal state, I can see that the text color is white and the background color is completely translucent. And if I go onto the hover state, that is inverted. So I've got text color that is sort of a dark gray or a black, a background color, and a border color. I have a few info box widgets dragged onto the canvas already, and it's a lot of the same really. So we'll go through each of the settings a lot quicker. Most of the styling options and content options are very much the same across the widgets, so we won't spend too much time on it. On the content side, again, you can see there's a preset section where I can go and change a couple of the presets to some of the predefined styling options that the plugin has out of the box. On the image and icon section, you can see that I have the option to set either a icon or an image, where I can set a image from the image library. I can set the media direction, whether the media needs to sit in media. That means the icon or the image sits on the side or on the top of the info box. In terms of vertical alignment, I can set that to the middle, the bottom, or the top. I'll leave that at the top. For the title and the description field, again, here I can set up the title, I can set up the description, various title HTML tags. I can set up the alignment of the content. I can set it to left align, middle align, right align, and so on. The button at the bottom, I can see that there is some button text, and I can again set the link of this particular button, which in this instance is just text to either route to a link within the website or externally. Over to the style tab, like I said, very much the same. I can set up the icon or the image size. I can set up offsets, spacing and padding between the icon and the text itself. I can set up border types around the icon and the image, as you can see there. I'll leave that to none. I can set up the border radius, box shadows, the color of the icon or the image, background color, or if I want to rotate the background as well. You won't be able to see that right now, as the background is currently the same color as the info box. On the title and the description area, here again I can set up the content padding within the title and description area. I can set up the bottom spacing, text color, typography. On the title, the description, same thing. And over on the button, I can set up the padding, the typography, border type, border radius of the button, and the various states. So normal, text color, background color, and the translation of the icon itself, and also on the hover state. The icon box widget is very much the same like the info box. The exception obviously only is there's a lot less content on it. I already have a few icon boxes dragged onto the canvas. So let's go ahead and look at the settings. So on the content side, once again, as with everything else, there are a couple of preset options, as you can see. So I'll go through a couple of these. On the content side, not much to change. I can upload an SVG file, or I can pick an icon from the icon library. I can specify the title, I can specify the badge text, and the box as a whole can be hyperlinked. So I can set up a link to the box, and then obviously again the title tags that can be set 1 through 6 on the icon box. On the style tab, I can set the icon size, the padding around the icon, the bottom spacing between the icon and the title. I can set up a border type, border radius. So in this instance, it's set up to 100 pixels based on the size of the icon. I can set up a box shadow, the color of the icon itself, the background color, the icon box rotation. On the title area, I can set up the typography, I can set up a text shadow, and obviously also a normal and a hover state on the text. So if I change that on the hover state, you can see if I hover over the text, that changes color. The badge itself, so I can set up the badge offset. This is where I control the positioning of the badge. I can drag it horizontally, I can drag it vertically, anywhere I want to place it on the canvas or off canvas for that matter. I'll just go ahead and reset that to its position. I can set up the text color within the badge. I can set up the background color. So let's go ahead and change that again to a preset color. I can set up the border type, border radius, box shadow, and typography. The skill bars widget is a very nice widget to showcase abilities or skills for a designer or a design agency. And as you can see here, I already have a skill bar widget dragged onto the canvas where it highlights proficiency or abilities on HTML, CSS, Photoshop, graphic design, PHP, WordPress. So let's take a look. If I go onto the widget itself, onto the content tab, again here you can see there's a couple of design presets. I'll select one there. You can see the color changes and also where the text is located. I'll change that back to design 2, which was the default in this instance. over to the skills area. As you can see, the 4 skills that are currently displayed on screen. So if I go into each one of the skills, I can specify a name, the level out of 100%. So if I change that to 95%, you'll see that that adjusts and that updates. And here also I have the ability to either customize the details of this on this screen by just toggling this on, where I can set the text color, the level color, and the base color, or I can go over to the style tab and set it from there, and the same settings apply on each of these items. I can go ahead and add an additional item, same here, where I can specify the name, specify the level, customize it here or customize it elsewhere. And then the text position, I can specify whether I want the text to be inside or whether I want the text to be on the outside. If I go over to the style tab, on the skills bar section, you can see that the skills bar is currently very thin. I can change the height of that skills bar as I need to, so let's make it a 15. I can change the spacing between, so currently it's fairly close together. Let's take it a little further apart, and so on. I can set the border radius, which is this radius on the end of the skills bars, set up a box shadow. And on the content side, I can specify the text color, the level color. So let's change that level color to green. I can specify the typography of the text there, and I can add a text shadow. Now the review widget is very much like a testimonial widget with a bit of a twist. As you can see, there is actually also star ratings inside of this review widget. So let's take a look. Again, on the content tab, under the presets section, you'll see that there is a couple of presets available. So let me just change a few so we can see what they look like. That one's a bit out of shape. Yeah, that one looks okay. Now, let's change that to 3. Yep, I like that one. On the review side, you can set up the star rating. So I can set that up to be a rating of 5 in this instance. I want to display the rating as either a star or a number. It'll show up like this. I can set up the review specifically, and I can specify whether I want to have the review before or after the rating. Yeah, so we'll just go and change that back to after the rating. In terms of the reviewer, this is where I can upload an image from my media library. I can set up the image size, the image position. So if I drag that image there to the left hand side, the right hand side, I'll leave it at the top. It looks cool in this design. Specify the name and the job title of this particular person, where I want to align the text, and again specify the type of HTML tag that I want to apply. On the style tab, for the rating, I can specify the size of the rating. Yeah, so we'll just increase that to a cool little size. That's a bit too big. Bottom spacing, so the spacing between the rating and the review itself. The padding around, the text color, the background color, as you can see here, these have already been predefined by the preset. If I want to specify a border or a border radius for the reviewer, the text box padding, the name, bottom spacing, text color, typography, the job title, spacing, text color, typography, and the review itself. And on the photo for the styling, I can set up the image width, height. Again, here I can specify whether I want an offset. In this instance, you'll see that it has a vertical offset applied just to bring it outside of the box a little bit. I can set the padding, the border type, the width of the border. Here you can see in this preset there's a 10 pixel width border applied to this, and border color. So if I change that border color, you can see that it updates there. Border radius, again, border radius is applied, and I can also apply a box shadow. Next, we have the image compare widget, which is a very cool way to show the before and after states of a photo by just dragging this slider across the image. Let's take a look at how it works. On the content, I can see that there is the before image that I upload from the image library and a modified version of it in the after, also from the image library. I can set up the label, for the after state as after, before as before. I can set up the image size to a specified size. I'll leave this as full. On the settings side, I can set up the visibility ratio. So the visibility ratio is where the slider starts. So I move that over to 0.8. You'll see that that slider moves across. So let's just move that back. I can also change whether I want the orientation of this slider to be horizontal or vertical, which means I'll drag it up and down to reveal the image in its before and after state. So I'll just push that back. On the hide overlay, you can see that this is currently hidden. So if I flick this back, you'll see that now the overlay is available. So if I hover over the image, I can see that there's the before and after tags, but I'll leave that as is. On the move handle, I can set that to on hover. So if I set that to on hover and I move to the image, you can see that that changes as I hover over. On swipe, that's specifically for mobile devices really. I'll just leave that, let's put that back on hover for now. And I can see that as I hover across the image. On the style tab, so for the handle itself, this is where I specify the details of the handle or the slider. So in this instance, it is white. The handlebar size itself, I can adjust the size here. The handlebar arrows, that's the arrow in the middle. I can set the box width, I can set the box height, I can set a border type, border radius, and so on. And for the labels, as you've seen, if I just go back, let's go to the settings area here. So on the overlay, let's bring that back to on click, so we can see that when it hovers. So if I go back to the style area here and I go to the label, this is where I can set up the padding around the label, the positioning of it, if there's a border around it, border radius, set up the color of the text itself, the background color, box shadow, and typography. Now the gradient heading widget is a very cool widget that allows you to apply gradient colors to a title widget. Very much like a normal title widget, with the exception obviously that you can add primary and secondary colors. So over to the content tab under the presets, you can see that there are a couple of predefined presets that comes out of the box with the plugin. So if I flick through these, you can see the different variations that are available. So I'll quickly jump back to this one. No, let's take design 3, a bit more basic. And onto the title area, this is where I define the text that I want to show inside of the title widget. I can put a URL to it to link the title text, the gradient heading, to another area of the website or an external link. So that's pretty much it on the content side. On the style side is where I can now define whether this is a classic single color heading or where this is a gradient heading. So when I select the gradient heading option, this is where I can now set a primary and a secondary color. Currently it is set to a radial type, so you'll notice that the one color is on the inside and it sort of circles out. And if I change the location here, you can see it increases or decreases the size of the primary color, and the same as well on the secondary color. If I change this over to a linear color, you'll see that it swaps over to sort of a left-right, where the primary color is on the one end, the secondary color is on the other. And I can do the same in terms of location, moving where it switches or where it blends from the one side to the next, and obviously also changing the angle of it to sort of a top, bottom, left, right, or an angle. Other than that, I can also change the typography. As with any normal text element, I can add a text shadow and a blend mode. And one other cool feature, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in this video, is the text stroke, which is one of the unique features that you get with the Happy Addons for Elementor plugin. And this is where I can apply a stroke to the text itself. So I can apply a stroke color and a stroke width, but we'll look at this in a bit more detail later on. So next up we have the team member widget, which is perfectly an ideal for displaying team members of an organization or a design agency in a very cool looking way. I quite like these. I've already pasted these in, available from a preset on the Happy Addons website. So if I head over to the content tab, again, as you'll see here, there are a couple of predefined templates that are available, which you can flick through and look at the different variations. Under the information section is where I'll add the photo of the person that I'm linking this team member box to, so I can choose the image from the library. I can add an image mask. This is again one of the unique features available with the Happy Addons Pro feature, and we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail later on, but here you can see I can add different masking to the image. I'll just reset that for now. I can set up the image size down to the person's details. I can set up the name, job title, and the short bio. Down to the profile, social profile section. So here you can see I've got a couple of social profiles already listed to this person, but I can very easily add a new one by clicking on the add item button, and you'll see that there is a fairly large list of items available. So if you scroll all the way down, you can see there are quite a few. So it's very easy to add a new icon or a new profile, and as you add the new profile, you'll see that the new icon appears, and I then add the social profile link, which I can of course open in a new window as to not redirect or direct people away from my website. And just back into that area, if I go down to the want to customize section, so this is where I can customize the social icons, what the normal state of the icon is, what the hover state of the icon is, but I'll leave that as is for now because I can change these in the style area as well, which we'll look at in just a moment. I have the option to also show or disable the social profile. So if I just toggle that to hide, you'll see that the social profile icons disappear. So I can just have a sort of a blank box with the team members' information. But I'll leave that in. It creates a nice little touch towards the bottom. So the details button, you'll see that currently there's no details button in this particular preset. So if I add the button, it'll add a piece of text. So in this instance, it's only show details. And I think in this regard, it's a rather nice feature to add if you have a dedicated page for this person that you would like to redirect to, where people can go and read more about this person, given that this is only a very short bio. So here you can link the details of this person or a new page that you may create to the button that you've specified. So I'll just leave that off for now. Over to the style area, this is where I can set up the width and the height of the image. I can set the bottom spacing, so that's the spacing between the image and the text. I can set up padding around the image. I can set a border type or a border radius. There you can see the radius applied in this instance. I can apply a box shadow to the image, set a background color if necessary. Over to the name, job title, and bio area, pretty much the same like any text element editing. I can set up content padding around the content area for the name, job title, and short bio section. Pretty much the same settings. I can define bottom spacing, text color, typography, text shadow, and so on. On the social icons area, I can specify spacing. So spacing that's available on the right hand side. I can set up padding in between the icons. I can specify icon size, whether I want to show a border around the icon, what the border radius would be. And then as we've seen on the content tab earlier where I create the social icons, this is where I can now uniformly set up the normal and the hover states and colors of these items globally. Yeah, so text color and background color. Over to the details button, pretty standard for any type of button. I can set up margins around the button, padding within the button, specify typography, border type, border radius, box shadow, and again, the text color and background color of the hover states. The deal button widget is sort of a cool 2-for-1 type of deal. Because very simply I could go ahead and place two individual buttons in a section, but in this instance it won't be necessary, and you'll see exactly why. So if I click on the deal button widget, then I go over to the presets area, you can see that there are a couple of presets available as well for this. I'm not going to change anything right there now, we'll get back to that in just a moment. So under the deal button section, you'll see immediately I've got a primary, a connector, and a secondary. So under the primary area, this is the primary text, or the text for the primary button. I can specify a link, I can specify an icon position, whether I want it to be before or after the text, what the icon spacing is between the text and the icon. And whether I want this to be a vertical, a queue, or a stack layout. So I can see if I change this around, that becomes stack or vertically or horizontally or inline. If I go to the connector, you can currently see that the connector is hidden. So if I just go ahead and unhide this, you'll see that it adds that additional connector option between the two buttons, which is pretty cool. And here I can specify a connector type, which is either a text, which it is now, or I can change that to an icon. And if it is text, this is where I specify the text area. And again, if I want to change the layout, I can change it to a inline or a stacked option over here. And then over onto the secondary button, this is where I specify the text, the icon, the link, the icon position and spacing and layout of the secondary button. So onto the style tab, I can go and style these individually. So common settings are pretty much padding around the buttons, the space between buttons. These are global settings for the entire widget, what the typography is, if I want a box shadow, whether I want to align the buttons to the left, to the center, or to the right of this container. On the primary area, I can then individually style, apart from the common settings, the button padding itself, border type, border radius, typography, and then normal and hover states on text color and background color. If I head over to the connector, you'll see that the connector is currently set to the presets. Yeah, so I can set up the text color, the background color, the typography, and the box shadow. So just quickly, if I head over to the content area under the dual button settings for connector, if I just switch that off and I go back to the style area and connector, you'll notice that it prompts me with a message saying that the connector is currently hidden, and it prompts you to enable the connector in the content tab if you want to see the styling apply as you go along. If I go down to the secondary button, pretty much the same settings as I had on the primary button. I can set up the padding, border type, border radius, typography, box shadow. As you can see, there is a box shadow, a slight box shadow applied, and I can set the text color and the background color on the normal and hover states. The number widget is a very simple, very easy to customize animated counter or number widget. As you can see here, I've got a very simple layout. I've got some text on the left, and I've got 3 columns where I've placed 3 number widgets inside. So if I go over to the content area, you can see that there are again a couple of presets that are available. So I'll just pick one of the presets available just to see what it looks like. And then as you can immediately see, when I made the change, there is an animation that happens up to a maximum number. So if I go to the number section, this is where I can change the details. So if I change that to the number 20, for instance, you'll see that that starts at 0 and it counts up to 20. And this is where I specify the animation duration. So here I can toggle the animation off, and only the number shows, so it won't show any animation. But if I turn the animation back on, and let's change that back to 10, I'll go back and select another preset. Okay, that looks pretty cool. You can see that the animation happens. Not too much to this particular widget. If I go over to the style tab again, so there's some general settings where I can change the size of the widget in itself. I can set up the padding around the text area. I can set up a border radius, box shadow. I can set up the text alignment within this box. From a background standpoint, I can set up the background either to be a gradient, as you can see here, or I can specify just a normal flat classic color. And here is where I specify that color. I can also add an image as a background to the counter, which is a pretty cool feature. I can put in a background overlay if I need to, and blend that background into a number of different options. And here I can also specify the background overlay to be either a static single color or a gradient color, and I can set the opacity. Now in the text area, I can specify text color, typography, text shadow, pretty basic stuff. And as you can see here, now I have the option to also add a certain rotation to the text if I need to, but I'm just going to leave that as 0. And as you see, it's at 0 there because the entire icon is rotated in this regard. So let's see if I change that to a 45. That should be lined up. Perfect. The Justified Grid widget allows you to very stylishly place your images in a justified grid using what is very similar to sort of a smart filter display type, where I can display images and place them in various filters. So the setup is quite easy. If I go over to the gallery section in the content tab, you can see that I already have 4 filters defined: the lifestyle, the portrait, the travel, and the shop. If I expand each of these, this is where I specify the filter name. I can set this up to be a default filter, and under the images section is where I would edit the images that I want to display within this particular filter. So if I click on the images, I can go here and I can add images to the gallery. I can remove images from the gallery, but I'll leave that as is. And as I go through each of the filters, you can see filter name, default filter, images selected, and so on. I can add additional filter items if I wish. The image size, this is where I can set the image size and resolution that it needs to display in the justified grid. Under the advanced section, where I can show the filter menu, show or hide the filter menu, whichever I wish. Yeah, so there I've hidden the filter menu. I'll go ahead and just add that back in. I can decide to show or hide the all filter and what I'd like that filter label to display. If I have captions enabled or captions defined, which I would advise you do for all of your images, this is where you can then add the caption, and the caption will show up in the image. Here is where I specify the height of the justification. So here I can see that all of these are set to 200 pixels with a 10 pixel margin, and I can hide the last row as well if the last row doesn't contain a full line of images, yeah, which gives me a nice rectangular or a square block, which is perfectly justified. Now I can enable or disable the lightbox feature, which means if I click on an image, it'll expand this image into a lightbox. And then from a responsive standpoint, I can choose to disable or enable these on tablet and mobile devices, and what I'd like the image size when the lightbox appears, what the image size needs to display. So on the style section, not a lot of settings. I can set up the border radius. As you can see, there's a 4 pixel border radius assigned to each one of the images. I can set a background color to this if I wish. Currently this is set to transparent. I can set up normal and hover states. So when I hover onto the image, you can see by default it already has that zoom effect applied, but I can also go ahead on the normal or the hover state. I can add a opacity, and as you see under the transition section for the hover, so there you'll see there's the grow hover animation. I can set the transition duration of that animation, and if I select the drop down list, there are a couple of options that I can choose from in terms of hover animations. Hover cursor, so here I can set up the different type of hover cursor effects that I can select from this area. On the caption area, this is the styling for a caption. If I've got the caption applied, what the padding on the text area is, the text color, the background, the typography, and lastly on the filter menu, the menu itself, what sort of margins do I want to apply on the filter buttons themselves, what are the padding, what is the spacing between these buttons. If I apply a border type, what should the border width and the color and the border radius be? If I want to apply a box shadow, I can change the typography, and in this instance I can also set up the alignment of where that menu needs to display. So in terms of hover states and active states, I can change the text color and the background color for the normal state, the hover state, and the active state. The testimonial widget is yet another cool, very simple way to display testimonials on your website, something nice that a client or someone has to say about your business, and it's very easy to set up. So I've got a few dragged in already, and you can see they're styled quite nicely. If I go over to the content area and the presets, again, like most of the widgets from Happy Addons, you'll see that there are a couple of presets that are available out of the box. and I can toggle through these and choose the one that I like. Or I can go down the road of setting it up manually, as we've done before. So very simply, if I go to the testimonial area, very basic, this is the text area where I'll place the testimonial text in. The reviewer area, I can choose an image, which will be a little thumbnail image that can display next to the person's name. So let's take that as an example. Let's take this lady, we'll add her in. And there you can see there's the reviewer's image. I can specify the image size, who the person is. This is definitely not a David, so let's call her Sally. Sally is the IT officer for Decor LLC. So that's pretty much it that I can set up from there. If I go over to the Style tab, from a testimonial standpoint, here's where I set up the padding within the testimonial area, what the bottom spacing would be between the testimonial text and the reviewer, the text color, the background color, the typography, pretty standard stuff. And I can set up a border radius as well, so you can see there's no border radius applied. But if I go ahead and add a border radius, you'll see that that border radius is not applied. Where is that going to? Okay, so that's actually set up on this area over here. Let me just select this and change the border radius back. Okay, I think that's not part of the preset. I can also set up a box shadow. From an image, I can set up the width, the height of the image. I can set up the spacing between the image and the actual reviewer text. And here is the border radius, obviously, for the image, which gives me that perfectly round image, but I can change that if I want to. I can specify a box shadow, and from the reviewer, here is where I set up the text color and the typography for the reviewer, the bottom spacing between the title itself and the detail, the name and the title, and I specify the text color and the typography as well. The logo grid widget is the perfect way to show people you're affiliated with or customers that you work with on your website, and it's fairly easy to add and configure. So on the content area under the presets, you can see once again, as usual, there are a couple of presets, and under the logo grid section, this is where I configure each of the logos. Now you'll see that each of these logos has sort of a grayscale default state. And if I hover over, you'll see the full color logo. So if I go into each of the logo areas, you'll see that there is where I place the logo. From my image library, I can specify a URL that I want this logo to link to, and of course I can set that to open in a new window. And I can specify the brand name. So if I go through each of these logos, you'll see that all of the logos that have been defined here are the color versions of this logo. So what is very nice is that it actually places a grayscale version of this. So when you hover over it, it gives you that nice colorful effect. So very basic. Under the settings area is where I go to image size, so I can define the image size. I've got a couple of different options for grid layout, so box, border, tic-tac-toe. And I can specify obviously the number of columns that I want to display, which in this instance, if I change that, you'll see that it just stacks that on top of each other. And because I have a specific number of logos, it looks pretty cool in this layout. Under the style area, not much to do. I can set up the padding around the logos. I can specify logo height, set borders if I need to. If I want to specify a specific background color, and a border radius if I need to. In this particular instance, you don't really get to see the border radius, but any other settings that get applied, you will most likely see it. Under the normal and the hover states, here you can see that we've got the option to define opacity and certain CSS filters. So in this regard, we have some CSS filters applied where you can see that the hue and saturation, contrast, brightness and blur have been set up to give us that grayscale effect. Under the hover state, I can also set up some CSS filters. I can specify a transition duration, and as with most of the other widgets, I can also go ahead and set up the hover animation, and there are a couple to choose from. Next up is the slider widget. Nothing new, nothing you haven't seen before, but fairly easy to set up. If I go to the slider, over to the content area, and again here I've got a couple of presets to choose from. Under the slides area, this is where I can go and add all the carousel or slide items, the images that I want to display. So I can upload an image from my media library. I can give it a title and a subtitle. I don't have to, but you'll see if I navigate over to the first image, none of these images at the moment has a title or a subtitle item on it. But if I go to the first image, just to wait for that to slide by, there you can see the image and the subtitle text that display on top of the image. So I can add as many carousel items here as I like, and you'll see that they will be displayed in terms of quantity by the navigation dots below. I can specify the image size, preferably that these images should be all the same size to make sure that this is relative in size. From a settings perspective, this is where I can set up the animation speed, so how quickly the image animates, and then obviously the autoplay speed, or do I want to autoplay or do I want to use the navigation options to navigate through these. So I can turn this off, for instance, and the animation will stop and I physically have to go and click the navigation arrow to move these along. So I'll leave the autoplay on, and this is where I can change the autoplay speed in terms of how long that animation takes. Should this be on an infinite loop, so infinite loop means it will continue looping through all the images indefinitely. If not, I can switch that off, and it'll run through from the first through the last, and then obviously it will stop. There's an option to set this up in a vertical mode, so currently it is sliding horizontally over the screen. So if I change that to vertical mode, you'll see that the images slide from the bottom upwards. Okay, in terms of navigation, I've got arrows and dots, so the arrows on the side of the image, and I've got the dots for the navigation below. I can change that to show arrows only or dots only. So if I change that to arrows only, the navigation dots below disappear and I can only navigate with the arrows. The previous and the next icon, these are preset from the icon library, and with the left and the right chevron, I can decide to not show any, or I can upload my own SVG, or I can pick from any other icon that's available in the icon library. So over to the style tab, slider items, I can specify whether I want to see a border around the slider item. If I want a border radius, you can see that there is a slight border radius applied. Under the slide content effectively is the text area that we have within the slide. So I can set up some content padding, I can set up a background type if I want to, title details, bottom spacing on the title and the subtitle, text color, typography, and so on. In terms of navigation, specifically on the arrows, here I can specify the size of it, whether I want to see a border, what the width of that navigation item needs to be, if it has a border radius. Because it has a preset, none of the values are filled in because these have already been predefined. And in terms of normal and hover states, this is where I can change the text color, which is effectively the icon color within the navigation, and the background color. So just to make this a little more legible, let's make that slightly darker. We'll go back to the text color and we'll change that to white, just to make this a bit more prominent for you to see. But other than that, nothing much here to change. If I want to change the way this displays in a hover state, I can change the text color again, the background color, or if I want to show a border. Now we've switched off the navigation dots, but this is where you would style them nevertheless. I can specify vertical positioning, so how far from the slider do they need to show, what the horizontal spacing between the dots needs to be, what is the alignment, should they be center aligned, left aligned, right aligned. And then again, also if I go to the normal, hover and active states, I can set up the size of the dot, I can set up the color. Hover, nothing changes but the color, and on the active state I can set up the size and the color of the navigation dots also. The image carousel widget has very similar settings to the slider widget that we looked at just a moment ago, and I'll show you how. There are a couple of presets, of course. as we've seen with all of the other widgets before. If I go to the slide section, again, there are some carousel items. So this is where I upload all of the images that I want to see from my media library. And as you've seen before as well, I can specify a title, a subtitle, and a link that I can associate to every image. I'm not going to do so here now. I can add any additional slides or items as I wish to. I can set up the image size that'll display. Under the settings area, again here, this is where, very similar to the slider widget, I set up the animation speed, the autoplay speed, the autoplay yes or no. I can set this up into an infinite loop. And if I set up a center mode, this is where I can have a slide that effectively starts from the center. Yeah, center mode. And this, as you can see from the note here, it works best with an odd number of slides. Otherwise, you'll probably have a slide that is split over the center. Yeah, so this works perfectly because we only have 5 slides in this image carousel. Again, here I have the option to set this to vertical mode. I can change my navigation from arrows and dots, dots, arrows, or none. The number of slides to show. So if I change this to 5, you'll see that it adjusts and it shows me all of the slides, or the 5 images, the 5 slides that I've selected from the setting here. So I'll just change that back to 3 slides. And again here, I can set up the previous icon, either show no icon, upload an SVG, or select one from the icon library. So over to the style tab, again, very similar. Here I can specify a slide spacing. So at the moment you can see that there's currently no spacing applied, but I can change that, put in a spacing between the slides. And obviously if I want to, I can specify a border radius to each of these. But I quite like the original layout. I'll set that back to 0, set that back to 0. In terms of slide content, again, as you've seen before, because we didn't add any title and subtitles to the image carousel, you won't see any content, but this is where you would configure the padding around the content. If there is a background type, whether it's a classic colored type or a gradient, the details around the title and the subtitle, spacing, text color, typography. And again here as well, there you can see the navigation, so the arrow. I can specify the position, so I can set up a horizontal and a vertical offset. If I want to see a border, what that border width needs to be, border color, border radius, the color of the arrow, and the background color for both the normal and the hover states. Same applies to the navigation dots. I can specify the vertical position, so I can move that up and down. I can put those within the slider or drop them down below wherever I wish to. I can change the spacing of these dots, how close or how far apart they are, what the size of these dots are in normal state. Yeah, so you can see I can make them really big, or I can make them really small. So let's change that to a 10. On the hover state, nothing changes except for the color, and on the active state, obviously I want the active state to be slightly larger than what the hover state is, so you can see that if I hover over the button, the size changes. And that's it. Next up is the image grid, and it's pretty much the same as the justified grid widget we looked at a little earlier, in the sense that we can place images in a grid layout. You'll see that all the images obviously in this, compared to the justified grid, are all the same size. I can set up a filter to filter through the different, in this instance, male and female images that I've set up, and I've got a filter defined just to bring all of them back in as well. So let's take a look at how it's configured. Again, pretty similar to the justified grid. I've got 2 filter groups defined. Within the filter group, I can give that a name. I can set it as the default filter, and I can set up all of the image that I want to display. I can move these around, change the order. I can specify captions, as I've mentioned earlier. I'll leave that as is, and the same applies to the female group as well. I can add any additional items if I need to. I can change the image size. Under the advanced area, I can show or hide the filter menu. I can show the all filter, and if I do, this is where I can change the label of the all filter. I can specify the number of columns. In here I can specify between 1 and 6 columns, and I can specify whether it's fit rows, masonry, or even rows. So let's just take a look. If I change that to masonry, you'll see that it looks like a sort of masonry layout, but I'll leave that back to even, so we'll keep them all the same size. And again, here I can enable or disable the lightbox. So if I click on a particular image, you'll see that that pops up into a lightbox, where I can just click the X there and it'll take me back and close that image down. Okay, and then again, responsive details. Do I want to disable them on mobile or tablet? These are all set to no, but I can choose from a responsive standpoint to disable these. What is the image size that I want the lightbox to display? Over to the style tab, I can set up the image height. In this instance, they're set up all at 250. So let's change that to 200. You'll see that that adjusts, but unfortunately now all the image are a little cut off. So let's see if we change that back to, let's say, something slightly bigger. Let's say 275. You can see that all of these models fit in beautifully on screen. I can add a padding in between these, so you can see that there's a padding applied, and also a very slight border radius. But if I didn't want to show that and I want to have these stacked up right against each other, let's remove the border radius, let's remove the padding, and you can see sort of a uniform grid. Here again, I can set up the opacity and some CSS filters on the normal and the hover states. And for the filter menu, a couple of settings here again. In terms of the menu, what are the margins, top left, bottom right, that I want to show? What should the padding be between the filter buttons themselves? What should the spacing be between? Does it have a border type? If so, what is the border width? What is the color? Border radius, you can see that there is a border radius applied, but if I change that to 0, you'll see that these buttons square out a little bit. I can set up any box shadows if I want to. Typography, alignment of the menu. So here again, I can change the menu to be middle aligned, right aligned. I quite like how it looks in the middle. And from a text color and background color standpoint, for the normal, hover, and active states, this is where I can configure these. Next up is the step flow widget. And this is a pretty cool widget to display potentially steps in a checkout process, steps in an order process, or whatever you need for the purpose of your website. Pretty easy to configure as well. A couple of elements we need to take into account. So again, as before, we've got a couple of presets that we can choose from. And down to the step flow area, this is where I can specify the icon that I want to see, and I can select an icon from the icon library, or I can upload an SVG file. The badge text, as you can see there, step 1, we've got a title, we've got a description, and we've got a link that we can redirect to another page on the website or an external link. The text alignment, or the alignment itself, I can set that to be left aligned completely, center aligned, justified, etc. And here I can choose to show the direction arrows or to hide them. So if I switch that off, you'll see that it switches off the direction arrow for each one of these items independently. Yeah, so we'll have a flow direction for this one, we'll have a flow direction for this one, and obviously, as you can imagine, the direction for that one will be switched off. So I'll keep that on. Over to the style area, we'll start on the icon. So here I can set up the icon size, I can set up the padding around the icon, bottom spacing, so that's the spacing between the icon and the text below it. If I want to have a border type, what the border radius should be. So as you can see, this is again set up against the preset. If I want a box shadow, so there is already a box shadow applied, but I can reset that and change that in this area. This is the color of the icon, and obviously the background color of the container that the icon sits in. Next up is the badge. So on the badge, I can put a padding. So I've got separate paddings here for top, right, bottom, left. I can specify these here. Do I want to show a border and what the border radius needs to be? So I can go ahead and change the border radius here. The color of the text, the background color, and the typography. Very straightforward, nothing new to see here. We've got the title and the description area where I can specify the bottom spacing between the title and the description. I can set the text color, the text shadow, and the typography. Same for the description, title, the color, text shadow, and typography. And lastly, on the direction area is where I can decide how I want to display these direction arrows. So it's currently set to solid. I can change that to dotted, and you can see that this changes. I can set up the width, so that's the length of the arrow, and what the angle needs to be. So you can see I can rotate this in any direction, 360 degrees. I'll leave that at 0. And obviously from an offset standpoint, this is where I can offset the top, so I can move that up or down. So vertical offset, and then horizontal offset as well, just to move that into position in between these step flow icons. And that's all. The fun factor or fun fact widget is very similar to the number widget we looked at earlier, with the exception that I can now add additional text to this area. So let's take a look. By selecting the fun factor widget over the contents area, I can choose whether I want to display an icon or an image. Let me change that back to an icon. I can select an icon from the icon library. I can upload an SVG. I can set up the positioning. So if I want the icon to the left and the text and the counter to the right, I can do so. And again, here I can change the values around, and that will show up as an animation based on the animation speed that I've defined. So currently it's set to 500 milliseconds. If I change that to something a little higher, you'll notice that that timer or that counter obviously runs through a little slower. You can set that up in whichever way you prefer. Obviously we've got the title text, which is the text that displays just below the number counter. On the options, not too much to set up. I've got a divider. This is pretty much the divider that I can show in between the number and the title. And I can set up the text alignment to be center aligned, left aligned inside that widget, but I'll leave that at center. Heading over to the style tab, here very basically I can set up the icon size, I can set up the icon color, I set up the padding around the icon, whether I want to display a border around, what that border radius should be. If I want to display a box shadow, I can set up the bottom spacing, so that's from the icon or the image down to the number counter or the fun factor. I can set up the background color of this widget behind the icon or the area, and I can set up an offset. So the offset would allow me to again set up a vertical or a horizontal offset in terms of where that image or icon needs to sit within the widget. Through the number and title area, again nothing new here. This is where I set up the padding around the text areas, around the number. What is the bottom spacing between the number and the text below it? What is the color of the text? What is the typography? Do I want to apply a text shadow? So you can see there's a faint text shadow applied. I'll go ahead and reset that. The title itself, so that's the title area or the text area just below the divider that you can see. And again, here I can set up the bottom spacing, what the color, the typography, and the text shadow is. And lastly, obviously the divider in between. What is the width of the divider? Let's make that 25 pixels so you can see that updates. What is the height? So here I can specify a thickness, obviously, of what that divider needs to be if I want to show it as a border radius. So let's make that something like 15, and let's add a border radius of 8, and you can see that updates. Here's where I set up the color, and lastly, obviously, the bottom spacing between the divider and the description and the title. The Calendly widget allows you to integrate your free or pro Calendly account with your WordPress or Elementor installation. Calendly is a free meeting booking application that allows people to go onto your website, select a time slot, select a type of booking. It could be a 15-minute, 30-minute, 60-minute time slot booking, and that integrates with your calendar. Now they obviously also offer a pro plan, but for this example in this tutorial, the free plan will do. So with the Calendly widget on the canvas, there are a couple of very basic settings that you need to take care of. First things first is the username. So your username is available if you go to your Calendly account, onto the My Calendly page. You'll see that your My Calendly username will be there, calendly.com/, and that's your username. So just go ahead and copy that username and paste it into the username section, and that will bring up your Calendly account booking form. You have a couple of options, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. On the free plan, you can only have one booking option available. So in this option, I've used the 60 minutes booking. And here I can show or hide the booking or the event type details. Yeah, so that just shows up the calendar, so it doesn't tell you anything about what the booking time is, but I'll leave that open so that the user can see what he's actually booking. On the height section, this is where I set up the height of the widget. You obviously want to set this up sufficiently, with a sufficient height, so that the entire widget fits onto the page. Not much to do on the style tab, particularly if you don't have the pro plan. If you are on the pro plan, you can set up things like customizing what your widget from Calendly looks like in terms of text color, button and link color, and background color. Next we have the new sticker widget. This is a pretty cool sort of a bar type like widget that you can place anywhere on the websites, anywhere on your websites, where you can display post content. And it's pretty easy to configure, not too much to it. On the content area, you can see that there's a new sticker area, which has a sticky title. Yeah, so this could be anything from latest posts to breaking news or whatever the case may be. And you can left or right align this. If I change that to the right hand side, you'll see that there's a border now. We'll sort that out in just a moment. So I'm going to bring that back to the left hand side, just so that I don't have too much to change there. In terms of posts, what do I want to display inside of the sticker area? So you can see I've got a couple of posts already, and if you click on the plus icon, I can go down to pretty much any of the posts that I have. So let me take another one. I'll add a few more, and all the posts that I add will then display in the sticker area. Okay, slide direction. I can specify what the slide direction needs to be. It makes sense that the slide direction in this instance is to the right, since my sticky title is on the left. And as you can see, I've got a border radius defined here, and the sort of ticker text moves out of the border radius. Something you probably also have noticed is whenever I hover over a title, it actually freezes the content, and you can see that my mouse cursor also changes, which means that this content is clickable. So if I click on this post title, it'll redirect me to that post page. So the space between items, here I can configure the number of pixels that I want to have between post titles, and obviously what the slide speed needs to be. So the default is set to 30. I can change that to any value that I like, and that will determine the speed at which these titles move across the screen. On the style tab, not much to change, so I can set up the background type to be either a classic color, single color, or a gradient color. And if I select a color, classic color, this is the color that I'll select. I can also choose a background image to put onto this border type. There's currently a border applied of 2 pixels all the way around. This is the border color, and as you can see, I have a border radius as well. So if I wanted to change that back to something that's a bit more square, I just remove the border radius. There is currently a box shadow applied. I can change if I want to. If I want to reset back to a default no box shadow, that's also fine. And then obviously I can set up the padding. So if I want to set a uniform or a global padding all the way around, you'll see that I can do that. But you can now also see that on the left hand side of the sticky, that the text there comes out because of that padding. So let me just unlink this. We'll change that, the left padding, we'll make that 0. Change that to 0. And let's give this, let's say, padding of 20 on the right, 20 top, 20 bottom. And there we go. In terms of the sticky title, a couple of things that I can set up here: title color, typography, background type again, so I can set up a background color, whether it be a classic single color or a gradient. Again, here I can put an image in. I can put a border, and in this instance, like I said earlier, I've got a border here, but it's only on the right hand side. So you can see I've got a 2 pixel border on the right hand side of the text, and this is where the post content will flow out of. Here I specify the color of that border, if I want a border radius, but this is a straight vertical line, so I don't need a border radius there. And then obviously also here I can set up the padding. So this is the padding around the text itself, so there's some padding to the left and the right, top and bottom. In terms of titles, so these are the titles that you can see ticking across or sliding across the news ticker. I can specify the title, I can specify the typography, and if I really want to, I can specify the text shadow. Next we have the social icons widget. Pretty much everybody, I'm sure, has a social media account of some sort at this stage, and it's very likely that you'd want to place your social media account on your website or customer's website. So very simple to configure really. Under the content area, icons, this is where I can add all the different types of social icons. I've got Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and I can add a few more. You can see this is WordPress, so I can go into the icon library and I can go and select from the social media icons that I have available: Snapchat, Telegram, Pinterest, and so on. Going back to the settings themselves, so if I go into the social icon, I can see that I've got the icon library. I don't have to show an icon, and then obviously there you would put the link to your social media account. I can enable or disable text, and this is where I would put in the social media network name. So here I would put Facebook, Twitter, Google+, etc. And then very specifically, I can, under the Style tab, set up global style settings for each, or for all of these collectively. But I can also go and customize them individually, obviously to suit the background color, border color, text color that is native to this particular social network. So you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So under each of these social icons, you'll see that it is set up to be individually or locally customized for both the normal and the hover states, which means each of these are styled independently. On the separator side, so you can see that there's a little separator in the middle. I can customize these as well, whether I want that to be a stroke or a custom type, what the stroke size and what the color needs to be. I'll turn that off over here. I can specify obviously the alignment in terms of where it sits within the container, left, right, or center aligned. And I can enable or disable sticky, self-explanatory, if I want these social icons to stick in a certain area on the web page. Under the style area, as I've mentioned before, there are a couple of common settings, and these are the settings that I would set up in terms of the color, the background color, the border color for each of these on a global level. Obviously the local, the ones that we've set up in the content area, under this area, overrides the common or global style settings. So here again, if I wanted to apply some global settings, some of them do make sense. Yeah, I can set up global padding, the spacing between the social icons, what the border thickness and the border radius needs to be, if I have a box shadow, and so on. Under the icon section, this is where I can specify the icon size, the padding between the icon and the border, and specific animations. So there are a couple available. I can set that to none, 2D animation, background animation, which is just the background of the icon itself, or the shadow and glow animation, again just apply to the icon. And then I have a couple of options available under the animation section. So from a social name, if I had added a social name within this icon, so let me go back quickly and let's do that. So let's put the social name on, and I'll put Facebook, not Facebook, just Facebook. I'll put Facebook in. I'll go back over to the Style tab, and under the social name section, this is where I can set up the typography. I can set up the spacing in between the icon and the text. And lastly, from styling, I can set up the separator typography. The Twitter feed plugin is the perfect way to display your or anybody else's Twitter account feed on your website or a client website. And there's a couple of things that you need to know before you get started. So on the Twitter feed section, obviously you'll have your Twitter handle or your customer's Twitter handle or any Twitter handle for that matter. But very importantly, there are two things that you'll need, which is the consumer key and the consumer secret key, both of which you can only get if you have a Twitter developers account. And under the Twitter developers account, you need to have created a project app. And within that project app, there's an area called keys and tokens. And this is where you'll find your consumer keys. So under the API and secret, you click on regenerate. It'll regenerate, or generate for that matter, the two keys that you need, the consumer key and the get consumer, or this consumer secret key, which you need to paste in this area, and that will display the Twitter feed for that particular account. So under the Twitter section area, you can set up various types of items, how you want to display the Twitter feed, where you want to display recent posts, old posts, favorites or retweets, the number of tweets you want to show, the number of columns you want to display. So obviously if I change that to a 3-column layout, I'd want to change that to only show 6 posts. So you can customize this and show as many posts as you want. I can show or hide the Twitter logo. I can show or hide the profile image. So in this instance, we've got the Happy Add-on Elements or Happy Addons by Elementor Twitter feed showing. And this is their icon that it pulls directly from their Twitter feed. So I'll leave that off for now. We'll get back to that in just a moment. I can show the account name. I can show the username or Twitter handle, show the date and time at which this tweet was published. I can show the favorite count. I can show the retweets count, and I can show the read more icon. But as you can see, this clutters up the feed quite a bit. So I'm going to remove some of these. I'll keep the favorite count, but I'll remove the retweets count, leaving it nice and simple. I can add the content, or I can customize the content word count that I want to display. So that's effectively the number of words that I want to display in this content area. So if I change that to 20, you'll see that that increases the amount of content that it displays in the feed. And then lastly, I can set up the load more button. So obviously if you have more than just the 6 tweets, you can add the load more button just to show some additional content. Under the general section, this is where I specify the alignment of the tweets. So I can set them up to display middle, left or right aligned. The footer alignment, this is where we've got the retweet and the favorite count. So I can change that to wherever I'd like. I'll keep that on the right hand side. And as you've seen, the button that we had earlier, I can also align that to show either left, center or right aligned. The user info position, so that's this area here. I can decide whether I want to display that below or above the tweet content. So we'll leave that below the tweet content for now. Under the style area, this is where I specify the layout of the entire widget. So the spacing between tweets, the padding, the border type. If I have a border around, the border radius, I can see there is a slight border radius applied, a box shadow, background type, so this is the color of the widget or the tiles themselves. I can either make that a gradient or a static classic color, and I'll pick the color there. And I can also even add an image to the background, a background overlay. Not quite sure what the content glossy effect is. I've turned that on, and this just looks like it places an overlay on the text. I can't really see it making anything significant that would look good. So I'm going to leave that off for now. Under the user info section, a couple of things here. The user info spacing, so that's the spacing around the user info, the Twitter icon. I can specify the size of the Twitter icon, and I can change that color. I'm going to change that to close enough to the actual Twitter icon color. Name and username, typography. So name typography, username typography, the name and the Twitter handle or username color, which I can customize here as well. So let's just keep that fairly consistent. We'll change that to pretty much the same color blue there. I think that looks pretty cool. On the content area, this is where I can specify padding around the content, the description, bottom spacing, below the description, the typography, the color of the text. The read more area here, you can see that it says the read more is hidden in the Twitter settings. So if you remember, going back to the Twitter settings here, we actually deactivated the read more button. Yeah, so if I activate the read more button and I go back to the styling tab under the content area, now you'll see that I'm able to customize the read more button as well. But I'm going to go back and just deactivate that again. Read more button. There we go. Down to the style area again. Content. I think we've covered pretty much everything except the footer and the button area. So the favorite and the retweet. So I've currently got a favorite area there. What do I want the icon color to be? It's again, make that a bit consistent. Roughly there. I'll change the icon color. I can change the text color as well. And for the load more button, I can also make some changes there to make it look fairly consistent and style it nicely. The bar chart widget is a very nice way to visualize or display data, pretty much. Very similar to what you would do in an application like Excel. Now you can see we've got two options. I have a horizontal bar chart with both positive and negative values, and the same on the vertical bar chart. So on the content area under the bar chart section, you can see that there's a drop down where I can select the type of chart that I want to create, either a vertical or a horizontal. And then I've got the labels. So you can see on the x-axis and on the y-axis here, I've got a number of labels which I'll assign data points or data bars to. So I'll set up all of my labels. There are a couple of months, and they are separated by commas. Then we've got the data points. So I've created a data point group here that is called Happy Addons, and I'll give it a label, and you'll see that that label also transposes over into the legend area, and then I can add some data points. Now these do not necessarily, as you can see, just be positive or just be negative data points. So you can see I've got a positive and a negative set of data points, but if I go and change these, I can always just have a flat bottom bar chart to display. And I can add additional items if I need to display multiple sets of data points on the same bar chart. That's definitely possible. So under the settings area, this is where I'd specify the chart height end to end. This is the area that I want to display the chart in, so I can shrink that down by reducing that number or increase it by increasing that number. So I can hide or display the x-axis and the y-axis grid lines on the chart. I can show or hide the labels. So these are the names of the months and the data point axis range. And then I can also show or hide tooltips. So here you can see if I hover over every data point, I get a tooltip that gets displayed. I can show the title. So here you can see the title of the chart, but I've already got a title up there, so I'll just go ahead and remove this title. Then we've got the scale axis range. So as you can see, that's a 0 to 100 scale. I can set that up to any increment that I like. But because all these values are below 100, it makes sense to just make that value 100. And then we've got the step size. So you'll see that there are step sizes going from 0 all the way up to 100. But I can go and change those step sizes and make that chart a little bit more compressed with a 20 step size. And then we've got the legend. So the top area, as I said earlier, the data range that I have is Happy Addons, and that's also part of the legend. And I can show the legend either in the top left, bottom or right position. And I can set up animation. So as I create the chart, as you draw up the chart or as you scroll through, there will be a chart animation that shows how these data points grow. And then there are a couple of different easing options in terms of how the animation displays. Next, on to the style section. There are a couple of common settings which is more related to the chart element itself in general. So I can set up padding, I can set up the bar width. It's currently set to 50. I can change that, or 80. I can set that to 50, so that just makes these chart bars a little narrower, and I can change that back to 80. The category width, so that's the area here. I can stretch this out. I can make these category widths a bit more. And then the bar border width. So you'll see that there is a slight border around each of these bars, and I can go and customize that and change them as well, and you'll see how that updates. The legend is fairly simple to set up. Pretty much the box width, so that's the area in which the legend sits. If you've got more than one item, some short, some long text, you want to be able to play around with the box width. And then obviously the typography. So on the labels, I've got X-axis and Y-axis label typography, which I can set up, and also the padding around each of these label areas. And then lastly, we've got the tooltip. So the tooltip has some padding, so that's the padding internally around the text areas. I can set up a border width, border radius, caret size. So caret size is this little caret or this triangle icon that sits over there. So you can see if I change that value to, let's say a value of 15, the chart updates, you can see that caret symbol size updates as well. Now, I've not really been able to figure out all the details around the display mode, because as you'll see, if I set that to nearest and I hover over that area, you'll see that it sort of jumps to the end of that data point with that bar. And if I change that to an index value, it pretty much does the same. So I'm not really able to see the purpose of this. However, if I change this to an Y value and I hover over these data points, you can see that it actually shows me some of the data points aggregated, and it shows me all the Y values. So not quite sure what that mode type is for. And then I can go and set up the tooltip, background color, border color, title typography, and body typography. So that's it for the bar chart. So next we have the 360-degree rotation feature, which is effectively, exactly like it says. It allows me to drag an image around a 360-degree view. Now, as you may think, this should probably be a 3D element, but you'll be surprised to see that it's not. So if we go into the Elementor settings, under the 360 rotation section, you'll see that it actually consists of a number of different images that have been photographed at different angles around the same rotation axis. And by adding all of the various images, the 360 rotation widget then allows you to cycle through these images and create a 3D rotation effect. So you can add as many images in here as you want to display the various steps of rotation. So under the settings section, I can set this up to autoplay, have a button play or none. So if it's none, as you saw on the front end, if I click and drag the mouse, it rotates. If I set this to autoplay, this will just autoplay by itself. And if I set the button play option, you'll see that a button appears at the bottom, which I can click to play the rotation and also click to stop the rotation. Okay, the magnify zoom, I've played around with this a little bit. I've not been able to quite see the extent of the change that happens. I'm not quite sure whether it's what it's supposed to do. I would imagine that this would be your ability to click on the item and zoom in, but unfortunately I have not seen this work at all. On the alignment section, same thing. I've played around with some of the alignment settings. I've not been able to see exactly what the alignment settings do. Maybe the configuration is wrong, so if you tend to figure it out, please let us know. On the style section, there are a couple of things. So we've got the entire wrapper here. I can specify the wrapper width. Currently it's set to 100% to fill the entire column. I can set a background type to be a classic color or a gradient color. I can set a border around it. I can set a border radius, box shadow, and padding around the sequence of images. Again, here on the magnify, as you've seen a moment ago, I've got a magnify icon on the top right hand side. This is where I set up the icon size, the icon color, the width. And then lastly, we've got the autoplay button, which is this button over here. I can specify a title, background type, border on both the normal and the hover states. I can set the button width, color, border radius, box shadow, padding, and spacing at the top between the button and the image. Next up, we have the data table widget. Now, the data table widget, as you can see, allows me to add data to a table, similar like I would in Excel again, and display them quite nicely with all icons and texts and numbers and so on. So the table is broken up into two main areas: the table head, which is this header area, and then the table row section. And each of them are defined quite differently. So under the table head area, you can see that I've got 4 items, which represents the 4 columns that you see right at the top. And if I go into one of the columns, I can see I've got 2 options, a content and a style area. So under the content area, this is where I'll specify the column header name. I can specify the column span, so the span is effectively the width of that column. And I can set up whether I want to not display an icon from the icon library, so I can load from the Font Awesome icon library or the Happy Addons line icon library, or I can upload an SVG file, or I can also add an image if I have one. On the style area, all I can pretty much change in this regard is the icon color. Now, just below that is the alignment. This is where I can set the content within the header row to left aligned, center aligned, or right aligned. I can also set the icon position to left, right, top, bottom, and so on. You'll notice here that the spacing looks a little bit off depending on where I place the logo. I'll show you in just a moment when we get into the style section where I can adjust the spacing between the icon and the title in the header. Next, over to the row section. This is where all of my tables content will sit, and you can see there's quite a lot of data in here. And very importantly, you'll see a couple of things, and this is where it denotes where my row effectively starts and ends. So you'll see that there's a line item here where it says row starts, and then there's a bunch of data in between, and then there's another row starts. So very importantly, since I have 4 columns, it is important to ensure that I only have 4 rows of data, which will each be populated in each one of these columns of the data table. So under the row starts area, you can see this is where I have the option to either create a row or an additional column. And then I start populating the data below. So first up on the first line, we've got the bootstrap design system. So if I go into this, you can see that this needs to fit into this particular column. So this is set up as a column value because this will go down into this column. Next, I have the value, which is the budget value. Same thing, it sits in a column. The name sits in a column, and the status also sits in a column. So if I look at some of the content settings, here I can see that there is a title value. I have a link that I can associate to this title value. Again, here I can specify the column span, so how wide that needs to be, if it needs to be something different than the header row, and also the row span. I can then also add media in, like an icon, an image, or nothing for that matter, and I can specify the icon from the icon library or upload. And these are all pretty much the same. So as I go through all of this content, you can see pretty much the same settings all the way through. And under the style section, this is where I would set up the background color of this cell, the text color, and the icon or the image size. So if I just go ahead and change that value, oh, that's pretty spot on. Here you can see I can change the size of the icons. Okay, moving on to the style tab. This is where I set up the styling for the table head and the table row. On the table head section here, you can see I've got some padding defined to the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. I can set up a border radius, but this is a square table, so no border radius required. I can specify a border type, which I have in this instance, so you can see that there's a border radius 1 pixel, and the color of that border radius is sort of a light gray. The background type is also a classic single color, and the color is defined in that area over there. And the title section, I can specify the typography and the color of the title itself. the icon and the image, and this is where I referred to earlier. Since we now have the icon on the left and the text on the right, I want to focus on the spacing of the icon or the image. Since the icon or the image is on the left, I will add a padding to the right or a spacing to the right. So if I update that to 20 pixels, you'll see that that adjusts. I'll change that back to 10. Here I can specify the icon size. So if I change that back to a little smaller, you'll see that the icon size adjusts. If I have a border radius around the icon, this is where I can specify this, and also the icon color. But here you'll see a message that says if you've added custom style, then the icon color will be overwritten for that cell. So since these are global settings, if I go and update the icon color here, it will update this as a global setting. So back to the content area here, if I change the icon color under the style area, these are local settings. So it allows me to change the icon color of each one of these columns to an independent color should I wish to do so. So moving on to the table row area, again here I can set up some padding for the table row. I can set up a border type. So in this case there's a very thin border type, 1 pixel wide border type defined with a very light gray color. And then I set up the normal and the hover states for this column. So I've got a background color for all the even columns, so 2, 4, 6, 8, and all the odds, 1, 3, 5, etc. And then I can set up a color as well. So the background, the color, and on the hover state as well, I can then also, as you can see, as I hover over these rows, you'll see that there's a slight color adjustment, which is what I set on the hover area. From a title standpoint, this is where I can set up the typography for each of the rows, and this is a global setting, so this will apply to all the text in that particular row. On the icon and image, here again, this is where I can set up the image spacing. So if I change that value to, let's say, 25, you'll see that all the text next to the images in this entire row moves out to 25 pixels. So we'll just move that back to 10. I can set up the icon size. So here again, if I change the icon size, you'll see that that adjusts all the way through. That makes all of the images rather small. So let me just bring that back up to a 25 size. Now what you've noticed here, and again, this is because this is a global setting, the image size or the icon size adjusts across the row. If I wanted to go back to the content area and I just wanted to update the size on the status row, I'll go back to the row, I'll look for the status area, under the icon area, the style, I want to change the icon style there back to 10, and you can see that that adjusts independently of the other settings. So back to the table row, that's pretty much all the information we can add here. As I said, you can add the icon size, the image border radius, so that gives us a nice round radius. And if, here is a message, if you've added a custom style, then the background color, icon size, icon color will be overwritten for that cell. So pretty much what I've just shown you, all of the settings on the style tab is a global setting, and if I want to adjust any of these independently, I need to go back to the content section and to the item of that row to modify it from there. The horizontal timeline widget allows me to place icons on a timeline by date for whatever reason. It could be the maturity of a company, the steps in the process of a project, etc. And as you can see, if I scroll to the side, it will keep flagging up and bringing up the amount of items that I have on my timeline. You'll notice that it keeps flowing though, and I've ended up in May and now I'm back in January, and as I keep flicking through, it'll just keep going through the dates over and over, and we'll look at that in just a moment. So under the content area, under the timeline, you can see that I have a couple of timeline elements. I can add as many as I want, but into the timeline area, this is where I'll specify the event date. I can then specify an icon from the icon library, upload an SVG, or I don't have to show an icon if I don't wish to do so. On the image selection, this is the image that gets displayed in the actual timeline icon, and this is where I can set up the icon size. Now we get to the content itself. We've got the title, which is that area over there. We've got a subtitle. So let me just bring that back to the January 1st item. So there's the subtitle, and then obviously there's the copy inside of it. And as you can see on the next item down, if we move over, that is the image item that is in the timeline area over there. I can specify a custom style, again, locally, which in this instance would override the global settings. So if I wanted each of these to be styled differently, not all the same, I can put on the custom style area, and I can set up the icon color, background color, the content background color, and the content color itself. Okay, moving down to the settings. On the settings area is where I set up all the alignment, the animation, the number of slides I want to show, etc., etc. So on the settings area, the content alignment, I can choose to align the content left, center, or right. I can choose to hide the content arrow, so that's this little caret over here. You can see if I switch that off, that little arrow is gone, but it looks quite cool with that content arrow there. Lightbox, obviously self-explanatory. If I click on something, it will pop up into a lightbox giving me more details. The animation speed is the rate at which this animation happens when I click on the next button. So I can adjust that here and adjust that here to set the speed of that animation. And like I've mentioned before, when you keep clicking on the right or the next arrow, it will go into an infinite loop. So it'll keep passing through all the items indefinitely, start to end and end to start, if this item is selected. The next item down is the number of items I want to show in this particular view. So it's currently set to 3. So if I change that to 4, it'll just compress all the content and give me the number of slides that I've selected within this view. I can set up the previous and the next icons over there, and on the style section is where we can adjust the styling. So heading over to the style tab, on the timeline area, this is where I can set up the line. So that's my timeline over there that sits behind the icons. I can set up the line thickness, I can set up the color, I can specify the date, so what the spacing is on the left, what the typography is, what the color is. On the icon, I can set up some padding around the icon, the size of the icon, the border radius. If I wanted this to be more rounded, I'll just change that border radius and you'll see that it applies that there. I can see that there is a border radius applied, or a border type, and a border width to these icons. These are applied there, color, background color, icon color, and so on. Under the arrows section, this is where I get to set up the vertical position. So where on this timeline do I want it? It doesn't necessarily have to sit on the timeline, so I can move them either up or down, but I think they look pretty cool on the timeline itself. It is fit for purpose. I can set up the horizontal position, how far in or how far out do I want this to display, what the size is, the border type, the border width, so you can see that there is a border applied, the color, the border radius, and obviously also, like any other button, I can set up the normal and the hover state, text color, background color, and border colors. And then lastly, around the content, so I've got some content that has a border radius. I can see that there is a border radius applied, so if I wanted to remove that border radius and make it more square, I can do so. I can set up the padding, I can set up the spacing between content, border types, border width, so I can see that there is a border applied, what the color of that border is, if I want to show a box shadow, and what the background color is. On the image itself, the image within the content, here I can specify the width and the height of that image, the bottom spacing between the image and the title, border radius, box shadow, pretty much standard stuff. On the title again, bottom spacing, what is the space between the title and the subtitle area, typography and color, same for the subtitle, what is the bottom spacing, typography and color, and then also the description. The social share widget is very much like the social widget we looked at earlier in this video, with the exception that this one allows me to set up share links. So this is perfect for a blog post if I want people to share it to social media after they've read the post. These buttons allow me to do so by configuring a particular share link to my social media accounts. So very basic, very simple to set up. Here I can see the share icons. I can add as much as I want, and as you scroll down through the list, you'll see that there are quite a few social media networks or networks that are available that I can add to the social media bar. So going through the settings, here is where I select the network. This is where I create select or put in the custom share link, which is a little different than the usual social media link, which just redirects you to your social media page. And again, as usual, I want to avoid taking people away from my website, so you would ideally want to set this to open in a new window. Next, we've got the button text. So by default, based on the network selection, you'll see that it places the network name next to the icon. But if I wanted to change this to share, I'm sure that everybody is familiar with the icon of Facebook and the icon of Twitter and LinkedIn and so on. I want to be able to ask them or prompt them to share when they click this button. Now here again, as with most of the other widgets, I can customize the styling of each one of these buttons locally, which means if I go to the global style settings and I look at the color and the typography, color, background color, these are not the same as the defaults that I see on here. And this is because we've set this up on icon level independently. So you'll see that we've got the sort of dark blue for Facebook, we've got the light blue for Twitter, and we've got the red for Pinterest. Yeah, so I can customize each button's color independently of the global settings under the content area. So in terms of view, here I can select what I want to view. So I just want to see, I want to see icon and text. I only want to see the icon, or I only want to see text, up to you. And then display type. So currently it's inline, and I can also set that to block. And then based on the alignment, obviously, and the size of the buttons, you'll see how these stack up. I can add a separator in between. You probably won't be able to see, but if I hover over the button here, you can see that there's a separator, which adds a nice little touch to the button, just separating the icon and the text. Over to the Style tab. This is where I'll set up the global settings, which is effectively the padding around the content within that button. The spacing, so here I can see a spacing on the right is applied between the two. So if I adjust that to a value, let's bring those a little closer together so you can see. So I can set that value on the right hand side. I can see that there is a slight border radius applied, but I can change this quite significantly if I wanted to, so make that more of a rounded effect. I can put in a border type, so you can see that there is a border type applied, and obviously then the colors. But I'm not going to change any of the colors here, as I've shown you a moment ago. So if I go to this area, this is where I would ideally, if I wanted to retain the colors of the actual networks, I would set them up on a local level rather than a global level. So here I can specify the icon size, the spacing to the right of the icon, the separator spacing, so the spacing to the right for the text, and then also the typography that I want to use. And then in terms of normal and hover states, again here, I would want to set these up independently of the global settings, which allows me to give it that unique color. The event calendar widget will allow you to embed a calendar on your web page. It can either be a manually populated Google Calendar or from the event calendar widget. Now, in order to use the event calendar, you have to have the event calendar widget installed on your website. On the Google Calendar side, you'll see that if I select Google Calendar, there are a couple of things required. I need to specify an API key and a calendar ID, all of which you can find by following the instructions on the link below, where it shows you how to create a new project under the Google APIs and set up a calendar API, and then how to generate these credentials. So back onto the manual option, which we'll work with in this tutorial. So here you can see I've got a couple of manual options or manual events defined. If I open that event, there are a couple of things that I can display. So here we've got the event title, we've got the guest or the speaker, we have a location, I've got a specific image that is associated to be a descriptor to this event that I'm showcasing on the calendar. I can specify the image size. If I have a specific page that this links to with more details on the event, this is where I can link this to. I can specify whether this is an all-day event. Yeah, and if this is an all-day event, what the text needs to display. So here you can see that there is an event title. It doesn't show all the details because it is an all-day event. Otherwise, I can specify a start date and time and an end date and time. And I can also style this individually. So I can set up the details around the text, the background color, the dot color, everything else of that event on the calendar. Okay, but we'll set that up to global for now. On the description area, this is the detailed description that will go into the pop-up that you'll see in just a moment. And that's effectively the description around the event type. On the settings area, we've got a couple of settings, language settings. What is the language of my calendar? A number of different languages to choose from. What the default calendar view is. So you can see in the top bar here is currently set to month, but I can set that to week, day, or I can show a list view. What is the first day of the week? Is it Monday? Is it a Sunday? I'm in the UAE, so it is a Sunday for me, but let's change that to a Monday for everywhere else in the world pretty much. And do I want to show the event pop-up? So if I click on this event, you'll see that it brings up a pop-up about the event, which gives me the start and the end time, who the speaker is, what the address is, the event title that we've populated earlier, and also the description text. I can close that down. And again, if I have an all-day event, this is the all-day text. If there are read more text within, I can specify that there. Here I can specify what the time zone is, the title of the speaker, and the location title address. So if I just go back to the events pop-up, you'll see that the time zone is reflected over here. There you can see the speaker title and you can see the address title. Onto the style tab. For the calendar itself, I can set up the calendar font family that displays unique font for the calendar. I can set up the background color of the calendar, the border color. You can see there's a border color applied, and obviously the today's background is slightly different just so that it stands out from the rest. Then we've got the calendar heading, so that's the days of the week over here. I can set up some padding around this. I can set up the font size, the color of the text, the background, which could be slightly different. So if I wanted to change that, let's say to a darker color, you can see that that changes. I also then maybe want to change the text. Okay, moving along, date and time. So date and time area, this is what I see in the body of the calendar, and I can also set the color, as you can see. On the top bar, that's the bar at the top that shows me the navigation between the different weeks, shows me the today, the month view, week, day, list view, etc. I can set the margins, how far that is away from the calendar. If I need a background to this, I think it looks quite cool with the translucent background on this sort of light purple background we have. I can set up the title color, typography, the buttons, the space between the buttons, the typography. Should it have borders? Yes, this has a solid border all the way around all of the buttons, and it's a very faint 1 pixel. If I update that to a 2 pixel border, you'll see that that bolds out just a little bit. And then on the normal and hover state, so you can see here when I hover on a button, it changes to a darker blue. So normal state, I can set all the colors up here, and the hover state the same. Then I can specify border radius if I wanted to apply a border radius to each of these buttons, just to give them some rounder edges, I can do so. And then on the event itself, which is this little guy over here, I can specify the font size, I can specify the color, the background, and the dot color. Now, if you remember, going back to the content area, into the event itself, right at the bottom, I can apply an individual style. So if I wanted this particular event to show in a different color, I can set up the text color to something else. Yeah, so let's change that maybe to, let's make that a red color. We change the background to also a red color, and we draw the translucency down just a little bit so we can see the text. There we go. And then we change the dot color as well. So I can style each of my events individually based on category, whichever way I like to. The Image Hover Effect widget allows you to create very cool hover animations on very basic images. Let's see how it works. On the content area in the image content is where I'll upload the image from my image library, which is the image in the background, and I can set up an alt text, and I specify a title and a description which will be visible on the image as I hover over the text or hover over the image. I can specify a link URL. This can link to a page on the website or something externally. If it links externally, I'll add a open in a new window. Then we've got the hover effects. This is where the magic happens. Yeah, so there are a couple of very nice hover effects available. So you can see if I change that to a different hover effect, that changes, and it's all based on the title and the description that I've added. So we'll change that to the Roxy style, which does that. Moses, and so on. Very basic setup. Onto the style area, not too much to set. Do I want to max the container width? So the container width effectively is the column area that I have. What is the image width? Does the image have a border? Do I want to place a border radius? So let's put a border radius of 25. You can see what that looks like. The title typography, the description typography, and then on the hover and normal states, normal and hover states, what do I want the title and description color to be? So in this instance, you'll see that both of them are just white, and that's okay. Then I can set up a background overlay. So when I hover over the image, what is the overlay that gets displayed? So if I just go ahead and set that to something different, you'll see when I hover over the image that gets applied. The animated link widget gives me 15 different very cool animated link options that I can use to customize link text on the website. Very simple to set up. Let's see how it works. On the link content area, you'll see that I can have all of these animation styles applied. So on the drop down menu, I can go and select any of the 15 animation link styles that are available, as you can see on screen. I can specify the title information, so we're looking at this one, and let's change that to something that says review. If I hover over the text, you can see that the text animation is applied. I can specify the alignment, middle, right, left. I can specify link text as well. Very, very basic setup. On the style side, on the link content, I can specify within the container what the content box padding is, what the link color is by default, what the link hover color is, and lastly the typography. The free version now also comes with a Mailchimp widget, which allows you to embed a Mailchimp subscription form on your website. The setup is actually quite easy. Let's take a look. So under the Mailchimp section, you have one of two options. One is to specify the custom details of your Mailchimp API that you can find within your Mailchimp account, which you'll need to paste here. On the global section, you need to go and paste the Mailchimp API in the Happy Addons dashboard under the credentials section. So if I go over to the Happy Addons dashboard, you can see under the credentials section, this is where I'll paste in my API key. So once that is in, you can select from any of the predefined lists that you have within your Mailchimp list library, and that's it. Then we start building the form. So I've got two options available. I can either use a horizontal or a vertical form. Vertical form will place the field and the button one below the other. I'll keep this at horizontal for now. Then I have two options additionally to add the name and the phone. So if I add the name, you'll see that it adds two new fields for the first name, the last name. If I scroll down a bit, which is pushed down because of the name details, and if I enable the phone, it'll also enable a field just before the email where I can enter the phone details. I'll deactivate that for now, and let's move through the settings on the name and email details. So first off, I can set up a label. The label will display above the input field. Obviously I can change the placeholder text, and I can enable or disable the icon. If I disable the icon, I'll just be left with an empty input field, but I quite like the visibility or the view of the icon. Here I can select an icon from the icon library or upload an SVG file, and I can decide whether I want to put the icon before or after the input field. Under the last name, same thing. I can specify a label, specify the placeholder text. Do I want to enable or disable the icon? Select the icon before or after, as we've seen already, to enable or disable the phone number field. And then lastly, I have the email field, again, where I can also input the label, placeholder text, and specify whether I want to or not have the icon. And then lastly, I have the button text, which I can customize. Currently it's set to subscribe, and it's got this little check mark icon, so I can customize all of this. And again, here I can decide whether I want to display the icon or not. So the success and error area, this is where you can see these display by default, and these are purely for styling purpose. So when I start styling the form, these are available so that I can see them. And under the success and error area is where I can then go ahead and activate or deactivate these messages to show them or hide them in the content editor area. I'll keep them on for now, as I want to show you where the styling options are applied. So heading over to the style tab, a couple of areas: label, input icon, button, success and error message that I've just mentioned before. So on the labels, we haven't got any labels defined, but if I did, this is where you would set up the details, like the typography, color, margins around the fields and the label themselves. On the input area, this is where I can specify the spacing between the input fields. So if I wanted to reduce that to, let's say, 10 pixels instead, it would give me a bit more real estate to work with in terms of the form styling themselves. I can specify the color, which is the icon color, the typography, the background type and style if I wanted to have some on the input, the border radius, border type, box shadow, pretty standard stuff, and then padding as well. So I can set up padding on the input fields on the left and the right of the content. Do I want to use width? Yeah, width effectively. Do I want to use the width of the content that is within that field? On the placeholder text within each of these fields, I can specify the color and the font size. If I'm not happy with that font size, I can reduce it to something smaller. And even if I wanted to make the text a little more opaque or translucent, I can change that in the color area as well. So next, on the input icon, so these are these little icons on the input fields. I can set up a background type either as a classic sort of standard color or a gradient, where I can set a primary and a secondary color. What is the icon color? The font size, so the size of the icon effectively. Do I want to display a border, padding around the icon, border radius, and so on. For the button on the right hand side, pretty standard stuff again. Typography, border radius, padding, box shadow, border type, text shadow, etc. And also, do I want to use the full width of the content within? I can set up some additional margins, and like with any other button, I have the opportunity here to also set up the normal and the hover states for color and the background type. I can also again set a classic single color or a gradient color. And then for the icon within the button, I can set up the icon spacing between the icon and the text, and the icon size. And then last but not least, the styling of the error and success messages. So by default, success message is green, error message is red. Here I can set up the padding, the margin, the border radius of these messages. If I wanted to select or remove the background type, make them translucent, and only have the text display in a certain area or in a certain color, I can do so. So for the typography on the success message, I can set that, the background type, border type, the error message, what the color of the text needs to be, the background type, and also the border type. Pretty straightforward. The free version of Happy Addons for Elementor also comes with a few post type widgets, one of which is the post list widget. So very simple to set up. If I go on the content section on the list area, I can also use this for posts, pages, landing pages, or products. Once I've defined the source, I can then specify what the type of post is that I want to select, either recent posts or selected posts. I can then specify the item limit. So if I have more than 3 posts on my blog, I can then change this and I can show in list view as many as I want. Under the settings area, I can have this as a list view or an inline view. If the width of my website allows me to do so, I can then show or hide the featured image. I can display or decide where I want the featured image to display, to the left or to the top. I can set the image size. Do I want to show the content or not? Yeah, so here I can add in some content. I can show the metadata. No, so if I don't want to show the metadata, that's the author and the published date, etc. I can also switch that off from there. So let's remove the content. Let's show the metadata. Under the metadata, I can specify some icons for the author, for the date, for the category, as you can see there, and we'll style them a little bit later. Here I can also set the alignment on the text. So do I want the post to display in the middle, on the right, or to the left? Over then to the style area. Here I can set up the list view, so I can set up various margins on the list view themselves. I can set up padding, top right, bottom left within each of these list view items. I can set a background type as either a single full color or a gradient, and I can then also specify the color. If I wanted to display an image in the background, I can also do so here. Set up a box shadow, border type, border width, border color, border radius. So as you can see, there is a border applied, there is a slight border radius, but if I wanted to remove the border radius here just to make that a bit more square, I can do so. But I quite like that little border radius that it had on there, gives it a nice touch. In terms of advanced styling, I can now go in and set up various styling for the first and last items. If I wanted to style them independently from the other ones, I can set them up to do so on a local level. Then deeper into the styling of the list item itself, I can set up the typography, the normal and the hover state colors on the title, the icon and the featured image, what the size of the image needs to be, the border type, the border radius. If I wanted this to be a square image, I'll take the border radius off. But again, here I like the look of that little round image. I can set up the margin, so the margin is the space between the featured image and the text content. And then finally, on the metadata, I can specify the typography, the color, the space between the icons and the text themselves. So let's change that perhaps to 10 pixels. You'll see that that spaces out a little bit. You can set up margins between the items and also the meta icons. So if I want to have a space between, let's set that up to, let's say 15 pixels. That's a little bit too much. Let's maybe make that 8 pixels. And that spaces out the content from the icons. And that's it. Then there's also the Post Tab widget, which gives me a bit more of a robust full feature look on the posts that I have on my blog. And it also gives me a nice little filter by category tab set that I have to filter through the different posts that I have on my blog. So on the query section, here again, I can set up the different source types. So I can set up for posts, landing pages, or products. And based on taxonomy, what do I want? Do I want to filter by category, tags, or formats? And then under the category section, this is where I can define the categories that I want to display the post types of. I can specify the item limit, the number of items that I want to show. If I have more than 3 items for each one of these categories, I can do so, and that will just add a couple more rows of the posts that I can display. Under the settings area, Here I can specify whether I want a 3-column or a 1 to 6 column, whether I want to show the excerpt text from the blog post, the filter position, do I want to display it at the top or on the left or on the right hand side. I'll leave that at the top, it looks pretty cool up there. And then the tab action, one of two options. I can either choose to change the filter by click or on hover. In terms of styling, pretty comprehensive, pretty basic stuff. On the tab set itself, here I can set the margins, the padding, the box shadow, border types and width and colors of each of these items. The tab item itself, I can set up the margin of each of these individual tab items, what the padding is. I've got some top padding, bottom padding, a bit more on the right hand side just to give some space for the text. And then the normal and the hover states, I can set up the various colors for the normal, the hover states, and also typography. If I move down, I can add a background image to each of these tabs if I really wanted to, set up the typography, border width, color, border radius, and so on. Pretty standard stuff. If I head over to the columns, I've got a 3-column layout at this point in time. What is the space that I would like to see between these columns? What is the margin at the bottom? So if I have multiple rows, how much space do I want to leave between the first and the second row? What is the padding within these column types, background type, colors and gradients, box shadows, border types, border radius. Over to the content itself, a couple of items to look at. I have the image. I can set up the margin below the image, so above the description of the post or the title of the post. I can set up a border type, border radius around the image if I wish to. Over to the title element, I can set up the margin again, so that's the spacing between the title text and the metadata in this instance, or if I had a post excerpt, that post excerpt would also be down there. Set up the typography and also the normal and the hover states of the title itself. Then over to the metadata, again here I can set up the typography, the normal and the hover states, colors, and the various margins as well. The last of the free post type widgets is the taxonomy list, and this is really just a basic list that allows me to list out all the taxonomies or certain taxonomies available on my website. So over to the source, I can see that I can do this by category tag, format, product categories, product tags, or even product shipping classes. So you can see I currently have 3 items defined, and I can select categories. I can add more categories if I wanted to, but in the category area is where I would then customize the title if I wanted to display anything other than the default category name. I can then specify individually an icon if I wish to. I'll show you how to set up common icons and images on the styling area. On each of these, as I go down, you can select the available category from the list by typing in a couple of characters. So there you can see all the categories I have available, and I can then add that particular category to this list item. Under the settings, very basic, I can have a list or an inline view depending on the number of items that I have and the real estate that I have available to work with. And here is what I mentioned just a moment ago in terms of the common icon. So I can enable or disable the common icon, so that will just let that disappear. So if I enable it, I can either use an icon from the icon library or uploading an SVG file, or I can upload a common image that allows me to view all of these images exactly the same on each of the taxonomy list items. I can specify the alignment to either left, center, or right. And then over to the styling tab, very basic stuff. For the entire taxonomy list area, I can set up some margins, I can set some padding within the taxonomy list items. I can set up a background type as either a solid background or a gradient. I can even upload a background image if I wish to do so. Set up some box shadows. You can see that there is a box shadow applied in this instance, and set up some border radius. So I can see a border radius of 10 pixels all the way around. Now if I go into the advanced styling, the same as we've had before on the previous post type widget, I can individually style the first and the last items in this list by specifying different types of margins and different types of borders if I really wanted them to stand out. So over to the styling of the content itself, very basic stuff. The title, here I can set up the typography, the color on the normal and the hover state, and on the icon and the image is where I can specify the icon size. So if I wanted to reduce the size of that icon a little bit, I'll change that. I'll specify the icon line height, the image width, if I had an image defined. So the icon is not visible at the moment, but if I wanted to change the image size here, then I can change the image size. Any CSS filters applied, so you'll see that we've actually uploaded a color image, but because we have a CSS filter applied, that has put this into this list as a grayscale image. Border type, if I wanted to, around the content, the icon and the image, I can specify a border radius, border type, and last but not least, I can set up the margin around the icon and the text area. Happy Addons Free also integrates with a number of contact form plugins. We have contact form 7 installed, and we've created a very simple contact form and we've placed it onto the Elementor canvas. Now, this is not the only option available. If you head over to the Happy Addons for Elementor website, you'll see that it also integrates with 6 others, including Ninja Forms, WeForms, Caldera, WForms, Gravity Forms, Fluid Forms. So very simple and easy to set up. Once I drag in the contact form widget, I'm asked to specify the form that I've selected. In this instance, I only have the single contact form, and I can specify a special HTML class if I want to add custom CSS class to this form. So on the styling side, pretty basic stuff. I have the ability to customize form fields labels, and the submit button. So on the form field section, I can specify the width of the form, the spacing at the bottom, so I can space these form fields out if I want to, set up particular padding and border radiuses, set up the typography and the text color and the placeholder text if I have placeholder text defined in my contact form 7 setup, of course. I can set up the normal and the focus states of each of these fields. So when I hover over that particular field, do I want to show a particular border around it? So let's change that to a solid border. We'll give that a border of 1, and let's give the color, let's make that a red color to be a bit more bold, so you can see that when I focus on that area, so if I type in or if I click into the box, you'll see that the focus color changes to the color that I've selected. Under the form fields label area, again here I can set up some spacing. So if I want to set some spacing between the labels and the form fields themselves, just to space that out a little bit more, here again I can set up the typography of the field names and the text color. And then last but not least, I can set up margins around the button, padding on in the internal of the button around the text, just to give that a bit more space. So if I wanted to maybe stretch that out, let's just remove the link there and we'll remove the bottom and top. Let's make that 10. You can see that is the padding that's applied to the button. I can set up the typography, border type, border radius if I wanted to. So let's add a 25 border radius there. Let's maybe increase this a little bit. Let's make that 35 and 35 just to space that out a little more. I can set up a box shadow and then also set up the text color and the background color on the normal and the hover states. Happy Addons have added some cool features on top of the out-of-the-box Elementor features to help you enhance your design experience. So first up, part of the free plan is the background overlay. This effectively helps me to create a background overlay on pretty much any section or widget that I have on the canvas. Let's see how it works. On the Advanced tab, if I go to the background, I currently don't see a background overlay option available, but as soon as I select the background color, you'll see that the background overlay option appears, the happy icon next to it, so you can see that it's unique to them. So if I go into the background overlay section, this is where I can now specify a background type, apply some CSS filters, and blend modes. So I want to add a background overlay over this icon box widget. So I'll select the background type. I'll go into the color picker. I'll select a background color. And here you can see I already have this background overlay applied to the widget. The CSS Transform feature allows me to manipulate widgets on the screen in a number of ways. So heading over to the Advanced tab under the CSS Transform section, here I can enable the CSS Transform, which gives me a couple of options. I can translate, rotate, scale, or skew these objects in either the normal or the hover state. So if I go into the normal state, just to give you an idea, translation effectively moving an object out of position in the X or the Y axis. So I can move that in a positive or a negative position, and that just moves it out of place, taking it effectively, offsetting it pretty much out of the predefined section area. So I'll just move that back to 0. The next option is to rotate, so I can rotate either in the x-axis, the y-axis, or the z-axis. So if I change these back to 0, you can see that I can rotate that around pretty much any degree that I want to. Next we have the scale option. So if I go over to the hover state and I want to set up a scale, I can then set this up to scale up to 2 if I hover over this. So that's another form of transformation that I have available. And then lastly, obviously the skew option as well. So here I can set up a skew of, let's say, 10 across X, 10 across Y. So if I hover over this element, you'll see that it skews that out. Pretty cool. The equal column height feature allows me to sort out issues like this, where I've got multiple widgets that has different sizes of content in them. And what I'd like to do is to realign and basically make these widgets all the same size. So this gets applied on section level. So if I go onto the section, go into the Advanced tab, you can see the equal height feature available, and here I can set to enable. And in this area, I can then choose to apply that to whatever is in this section area. So I've got widgets in this section area, and here I need to choose the type of widgets that I want to apply this to. So I select the card widget, and immediately you'll see that all of these widgets are resized. Unfortunately, it doesn't solve the problem with the buttons, but that's something you'll sort out separately with some custom CSS. The floating effect is a motion effect that helps me manipulate content like these images in such a way that they can constantly move or behave in a certain way on screen. So for this example, because I've got a couple of things in this area, it's quite crowded, I'll use my Elementor navigator to get to the images that I want to use. And I want to use these two images. The girl looks like she's jumping and the guy jumping holding a guitar. So let's start with him. Choosing that particular image, I go over to the Advanced section and into the floating effects, and here I can see I've got the floating effects enabled. If I switch that off, you'll see that that image becomes static. So switching that back on, I've got a couple of options that I can set here: the translation, the rotation, and the scale. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is just to give you an idea of what I can do. If I select the edit, this is where I can set up the parameters in which this guy needs to move in. So if I change that in terms of X and I change that to 50, you'll see that he starts moving quite a bit, and the same on the Y axis, you'll see that he starts moving up and down a bit. Okay, fairly simple. So if I reset that back, you'll see that that becomes static. If I wanted to rotate this guy, you can see I can do that as well. And if I wanted to scale him, you see that that allows him to bounce as well. I can mix and match these. Let's take that and make him translate a little bit as well. So let's make him move, jump forward, jump backwards. That's quite a cool effect. I'll maybe just dim this down a little bit to here. And then also I can set up the duration that this needs to take in milliseconds. Yeah, how quickly or how slowly that motion effect takes place. What I'd like to do here as well, just as an additional cool effect, it's not part of the floating effects, but if I go on to the Advanced section, here I can set up the Z index. I'd like his guitar to show up in front of this card. So I'll just go and change that to a Z index of, let's say, 3, and you can see how that has an effect. So this is a very simple way to add very cool animated motion effects to your website with the Happy Addons floating effects feature. The next one is pretty cool. If you've ever heard of, or if you're familiar with the grid layout or the grid layer settings in graphic design, that pretty much helps us keep our design in check, helps us space things out more appropriately on screen. I think you'll really love this one. You probably didn't even know that it existed, but let me show you. So if you open up a page like this, and you're looking for a layout that will help you position and space things, and in general just use good design principles to put all of your graphic elements on screen, you would definitely need this grid layout. So with the page open, if you go to your page settings, you'll see that there is now a feature by Happy Addons for grid layer, which you can click on, and here you can then activate the grid layer, and that shows up a grid layout in such a way. So by default here it's set up to show 12 columns, but I can change that to show 4, and this really helps me put things into perspective based on the screen width that I'm designing for, the offset that I have in between, the gutter between the different columns, and the Z index. So Z index is just, this places it right on top of or over all of your elements, and this is just a really cool guideline to help you streamline the design process of your website. So the shape divider is already part of Elementor if you didn't know it, but what Happy Addons have done is they've added a few extra shapes that you can add to the shape divider. If you didn't know it existed, let me show you where it is. So if I go onto this section area into the Style tab, you'll find that there is a shape divider area, and what the shape divider effectively allows me to do is add really cool content or shape divider effects to the bottom and the top of section areas. Yeah, so I can increase the size, I can increase or change the color, increase the width. So let's change the height. You'll see what I mean. Let's change that to something a bit more curvy. And these are the standard ones that are available, the default shapes. So there are a couple of new ones that Happy Addons have added, and these are the ones below. So you'll have quite a few of them there. So we've got an abstract web, we've got multi-cloud, etc., etc. So play around with them. There are quite a couple, very few cool ones that Happy Addons have added. And as I've said, you can change width, you can change height, you can flip them around, put them upside down, invert them left to right, bring to front, put them in the back. And when you bring to front, obviously it'll put all the content that's currently on the page behind, or if you leave it behind, the content will sit on top of it. Very cool additional features that they've added. Sometimes when you design, you don't necessarily need a button to click on to redirect, or you don't want a button to click to redirect to a certain page or an external website. You want to be able to add a link to pretty much any section or any area on the website. And the Happy Addons wrapper link allows you to do just that. It gives you the ability to add a link to pretty much any area of the website. A full section, a column, an entire widget, and it's quite easy to do. On the column selected, with the column selected here, I can go into the advanced section, into the layout section, and under the wrapper link area, this is where I can specify a link. So we'll just link this to, let's just bring that to google.com, and I want this to open in a new window. So as I can see here currently, it doesn't really show me the ability to open this in a new link. But if I save the page and I go over to the front end of the website, you will now see that I have a dynamic link or a link applied to the entire widget area. If I now click on this item, or if I hover on this item, first off, you can see that the entire area is now a live link and not just the button, as opposed to the one on the opposite side where I can click anywhere and nothing really happens. But let me click on this one, anywhere on the widget really, and you'll see that it redirects to that external link. And that's a wrap for part 1 of this 2-part full feature series on Happy Add-ons for Elementor. In this video we covered all the widgets and features you'll get on the free plan. I hope you stay tuned for part 2 where we'll do it all over again, looking at all the widgets and features available in the Happy Add-ons Pro package. And we'll also take you on a tour through all of the templates and sections available with this plugin to get you started with building a new website in no time. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you found it useful or helpful, please let us know. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our channel, hit the bell for notifications, and stay tuned for more great content. I've put a few links to tools, services, and plugins that I use in the description below. These are affiliate links. If you purchase a product through them, I will receive a commission at no additional cost to you, of course. I only endorse products that I've personally used, and your support helps me put out more great content. So thanks. Bye for now.